How many of you came to CES just for this conference? How many of you told your program officers you came just for this conference? Fair, you know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We're not scanning the room. We didn't tag your badges. We didn't tag your badges. How many of you were surprised, sort of got here and found out there was an education event and were truly surprised? How many of you have been happily surprised thus far for the first hour of what we've been doing? Great. Is anybody tweeting? Are you tweeting nice things? All right. I mean, these are all fair questions. So we're just about ready. So while we're getting our last panel member wired up, our next conversation is about digital textbooks and courseware. How many of you own a reader or have a reader app on a device? How many of you use it for general reading? How many of you use it for serious academic professional reading? Some of those hands went down, okay? Very good. So our panel today, again, like the previous panel, they have impressive degrees, they have accomplishments that will make your parents and your friends and your spouses say, why didn't you do that? Amanda Antico-Majikowski is the president of the Saylor Foundation. Richard Bannerlock is at Rice University with connections and OpenStax. He's a chaired professor. Those of you outside academia, if you are a chaired professor, that's a big deal, especially at Rice. Is that right, Rich?
My chair.
You got a couch. You are an incredibly important faculty member, then. That's great. G. Gooder is vice president at Kaltura. Mickey Leviton is at Courseload, CEO at Courseload. And I think I got everybody. So great. Let me set a context as I did last time. Great aspirations for technology and education. The processing and uses of information technology are undergoing an unprecedented technological revolution. How often have you heard that in the last year? How often have you heard that in the last 30 years? Okay. Not only are machines able to deal with many kinds of information in large quantities, massive doses. This sounds like an old Coneheads commercial skit from Saturday Night Live, massive doses of information, but we can process them, manipulate them in new and interesting ways. Nowhere truer in the field of education. It's possible to imagine millions of school children will have the equivalent of an Aristotle at hand. Sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? Sounds like the kind of thing you'd want to use as the topic statement or sort of a draw quote in your strategic plan or a grant proposal. The problem, ladies and gentlemen, is this is 1966. This is Patrick Suppes at Stanford. I used this quote in a presentation some years ago. Suppes probably taught the first online course in American higher education using punch cards. It wasn't a programming course. It was an online course using punch cards. If any of you don't remember punch cards, ask somebody with gray or thinning hair sitting next to you. Not a very pleasant experience. Also, to anchor our conversation about going digital, this is Thomas Alva Edison a century ago. Books will soon be obsolete in the public schools. Scholars will be instructed through the eye. Teach every branch of human knowledge with a motion picture. Our school system will be completely changed in 10 years. Let me add, in 1913, this is what, 15 years before the emergence of talkies. So he's truly talking about images. We know that schools weren't completely transformed by 1923. We also know that it was actually the experience of using film as a propaganda and training tool in the Second World War, coupled with the Cold War and Sputnik, that was a catalyst for bringing film into schools. In the wake of Sputnik, Sputnik went up. Many of us suffered with new math when Sputnik came down. In that process, film became an important instructional medium in the schools. Some of us are old enough to remember the Bell and Howell films, Simo the Magnificent, all this great stuff that was kind of like the internet in 1963 because it was a rich, engaging supplement that the teacher couldn't do. I want to thank Brian Kibbe for this quote because it's going to set up our conversation. In August 2012, Brian, in an opinion piece in Inside Higher Ed, said the publishing industry needs to do all it can in 36 months to turn all digital content, all curricular content, completely digital. I read this and I thought of President John Kennedy and Kennedy's 1961 statement about we will send a man to the moon by the end of the decade. Kennedy picked the easier task, Brian. Because all Kennedy had to do was worry about money and technology. You went after culture. both your own in the publishing industry, business models, as well as those of your academic clients. So we're going to come back to that. And also lurking around casting a shadow over our conversation is the whole movement towards OER, open curricular resources. We know that publishing is an ecosystem, that it's not about just a digital book or a digital widget or a learning object, but in fact what educational publishing does is it creates an ecosystem of resources for teachers and faculty, and at least at one level you could argue that that ecosystem has become a fortress because the OER movement doesn't have the resources that publishers have in terms of bringing resources to marketplace, updating, vetting, supporting those resources. And the last shadow over our conversation about going digital is the one of money. 3 years ago at this conference, Sean Devine from CourseSmart, when pressed about money, and the folks that are doing digital make a lot of claims. There was a press release, I believe, from Chegg that I saw in my email this morning. Chegg has said digital products have saved students tens of millions of dollars. All the digital providers claim that. And yet, you know, the question is, well, why does digital still cost a lot? This is my random walk. I'm not picking on McGraw with this, but I did this 2 days ago in terms of looking at a widely used micro book by Frank and Bernanke. That Bernanke is our former Federal Reserve Chairman, who's going back to Princeton, to see, well, what are the different options for buying a widely used econ book? And when I pressed Sean Devine from CourseSmart on this, which is a digital publisher, does stuff from all the publishers as many others do, Sean, in a very public and candid moment at this audience several years ago, said, look, let's be candid with one another. Going digital only saves you on printing and shipping. And in fact, going digital can add additional costs in terms of added value environments. So let's understand that. Ironically, 45 minutes later, Walt Mossberg, the technology columnist for the New York Times, walked in for the closing session. This was 3 years ago when tablets were the rage at CES. Began his comments by saying, I don't know much about higher education. I sit on the board of Brandeis. That's been an engaging and enlightening experience, period, paragraph. Gee, there are a lot of tablets here at CES, period, paragraph. And gee, textbooks ought to be digital and they ought to be way less expensive. So all these things are part of the gumbo of our conversation in terms of going digital. So Brian, I want to come back to you. And I want to come back to your moonshot statement as a way of beginning our conversation about going digital. The clock is ticking. It's a big virtual clock, 36 months. We're now sort of 16 months into that. Where are we? Are we doing well? Are we making progress? What are the challenges? And will we get there? And will the publishing industry get there? And will your clients get there in terms of accepting this transition in resources?
I actually think that my comments were pretty easy in that they're a foregone conclusion. It's not really attacking culture. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a year or 18 months from now, it's absolutely going to happen. In my own company, we're moving fast. We have a countdown in every company device everywhere. We got one year, 6 months, 24 hours, et cetera, to become all digital.
So there's a lot of virtual clocks at McGraw-Hill.
It's going to happen. Uh-huh. Candidly, it's an embarrassment today that there are textbooks on campus in higher education when there are tools that are far more student-focused, whether it's from my own company or my competition or from startups, mm-hmm. that will focus and help students improve their results and their outcomes. That's ultimately what we all care about. So it is a foregone conclusion that's going to happen. And it's not just about textbooks or ebooks in some form. It's also about the college universities themselves. So if you're a college university president today, if I were one, I would absolutely just say we're going to be the most digital campus or university in the world. We're going to be the campus that best prepares students for the digital, to compete in the digital world. And I would argue that those college university presidents, like learning companies, if you do not come from a place of complete disruption, you're going to be dead. It's not going to work.
I think that, fair point. You know, I agree with you. We're going to get there. If we get there in 36 months from the time of your article, the question is not if, it's a matter of when. The when, all over the place. Unlike you as a CEO, college presidents have less command and control. They do a lot of encouraging and cajoling. Faculty have a lot of autonomy. We also know that there's some student pushback about the current generation of digital products. Again, maybe the metaphor, it's like DOS 1.0. They have not necessarily delivered on price, fairly, rightly or wrongly, in terms of it's going to cost a lot less because it's digital, about added value,
Right.
about transferring features and functions that I'm used to in paper, annotating, marking, finding stuff, let alone added value in that. So it's not just a matter of the dicta of a president or a provost, even a department chair. It's ultimately about the choices of faculty members and the acceptance of students as the actual buyers of this stuff. That's where the big cultural issues are, aren't they?
Right, so two
you
things.
can control McGraw-Hill.
I actually can't.
Okay.
And so ultimately, whether you're a leader of a small team, president of a company, president of college, university, you don't have a lot of power. So in my own organization, you have to sell even the top talent within your own team on why it's important. So the question of approaching the price. Right now, I gave a keynote at UMass Amherst to the freshman class. And a young woman raised her hand, and the whole topic was success and leadership and how you become successful in your life. And she said, Brian, why did I just pay $300 for a print A&P textbook, anatomy and physiology textbook? I said, I have no idea why you did, other than the fact that you have a backpack sitting in front of you, because what's sitting in your store or online is this far more dynamic experience called SmartBook at an incredibly affordable price. Or you can go online, if you just want a basic ebook, you can get it for $30. So the affordability issue has already been solved. So then we say, why at this point are only 3 or 4 or 5% of students actually using it? That's my fault. And that's the fault of others. And what I mean by that, we're going to fix that because that's just an awareness issue. And that's a solvable problem. They're often not aware of what's available. And once people become aware, it's all just going to move like that.
All right, so you've given me a great segue to talk with Rich. Awareness certainly is one of the challenges confronting OER, Open Educational Resources, the movement to free textbooks, in one sense. It makes for great drama to have the two of you sitting next to one another. Although you've been very well behaved so far.
But what's nice is I'm a hugger.
Does that stay in Vegas, or can that go beyond Vegas?
It goes everywhere.
You know, I think we're being taped, so this is going to be up on YouTube. Be very careful what you say on this. So, Rich, OER has lots of things about it that should, in theory, make it very attractive. There's an awareness issue. There's an issue for faculty members. Brian's provides sustainability. You know, if I sign an agreement with Brian, I've signed not so much a contract, it's a Faustian agreement, in the sense that he's not looking at me as a book, he's looking at me as a franchise. And not for the first edition, but for 15 to 30. Well after he's in his pension and I'm in my pension. If I get bored after 15 years and 7 editions, McGraw-Hill has the right to add another author, and they're going to do all kinds of infrastructure support that's at present not necessarily there for OER. Digital is essential to the diffusion of OER. Where is OER in this conversation about going digital, awareness, infrastructure, and sustainability and scale?
Well, I think you're right on target when you talk about the fortress and the fact that to a large extent, most open education projects have really not thought enough about the context of business and sustainability and where they fit in the educational publishing industry as a whole. And at OpenStax, the project we have at Rice, is very different from that because we're really trying to address exactly these two challenges head on. So the first relates to professional development and high quality. So we're thanks to venture philanthropic backing, we're adopting the exact same approaches to developing content that the major publishers use. So professional authoring, editorial teams, peer review, careful classroom testing. And we think that this approach is really critical to developing the kind of high quality content that can be embraced by faculty, right? Can be adopted, and then can help students achieve their learning goals at a price of $0. So I think that's the first key thing we're doing. The second is, just like the symbiotic relationship that Red Hat has with the Linux operating system, right? Open source and for-profit partnerships, OpenStax has a growing ecosystem of nonprofit and for-profit partners, people like Courseload, Saylor, John Wiley and Sons, who are adding value around our content, right? Bundling services around the content, and then when appropriate, they're sharing revenue back with the initiative, and that helps us both sustain long-term and also scale. So we're really excited about the fact that thanks to these partnerships, we're already in over 400 schools across the country.
But I'm going to ask the same question to you that I posed to Brian.
Yeah.
Brian talked about presidents doing dicta about digital.
Right.
I know there are presidents that would like to do dicta about OER. In each instance, that dicta would go up against a culture of faculty prerogatives to select what materials they use. You both confront a common problem in terms of you each feel you have a solution. They come at different paths, but those solutions aren't one that can be ordered down. They have to kind of come ground up. Is that true?
Absolutely. So I think while we have seen some sort of buy-in at the president level at a number of large schools, ultimately it's a faculty choice. And so we view our job is to provide a really compelling product that when a faculty member is trying to both save money for their students and provide a really good learning outcome, it becomes a no-brainer to pick our product.
Okay, faculty choice. Gee, video was not part of a conversation about textbooks 50 years ago.
Yep.
Kaltura does video. Edison told us a century ago, the mind's eye in terms of his, let me bring that back up.
He may have been a little over-optimistic.
Pardon?
He may have been a little over-optimistic.
He would not be the first to overhype a potential of a technology to education. So, he may have been the first, but there's a long line of folks that followed. How important in this world of added value content, whether it's for OER or for the stuff that Brian does, whether McGraw produces it, it's something that's up on the internet, the whole notion of video in this new world of enhanced value content?
I think that, I'm certainly biased working for Kaltura, but I think that if you look at the revolution in education, whether it's MOOCs or blended learning, flipped classrooms, that video is at the crux of all of these things. And 32% of higher ed students today are taking a class online, and I guarantee the vast majority of those students are using video to do that. But at the end of the day, video is really a data type that the institution is not comfortable with yet. They do not have the policies and practices in place necessarily to allow video to proliferate.
I'm going to hold you for a moment. You said institution. How many of you are faculty members? How many of you use video in your courses? You are all early adopters, aren't you? How many of you have colleagues that would like to use video but are just uncomfortable finding or creating or curating? Okay, go ahead. Just to add to that.
One of the things we see at Kaltura a lot is that video is being created kind of from the traditional classroom in these long kind of monolithic blocks of content. And edX released some data this summer that I thought was incredibly fascinating that showed that really the average, that the most effective content really is created in kind of a 6-minute to 9-minute block. And that actually when content is video content is published that is longer than that the drop-off rate is actually a lot earlier. A 15, 40-hour-long video, the student watches 2 or 3 minutes, but when it's a 6 to 9 minute video, they tend to watch the vast majority of it. I think that Coursera, Audacity, edX, they've really done a great job of creating bespoke video content for the audience, for the device. And I don't think that that's the case at the typical institution that we work with.
So the hour-long video of a lecture or 45 minutes of a conference tails off very quickly.
Very quickly.
So the folks who are at the end of this panel aren't going to get as many viewers as the folks at the front end.
Exactly.
So I should get very quickly to the next speakers. Is that right?
If I may, I think 6 minutes. I think it might be 60 seconds. Now, attention deficit disorder kicks in very, very quickly, not just for adults, but for students. So the new offerings today, we have something called SmartBook, where it's an adaptive reading technology that will include video and snippets, and it's all an integrated living experience. So that's really the future of it. Just a quick note, most people think that when they talk to a learning company president that has a lot of content, and you're talking to open source evangelists, that somehow that's going to be offensive in some way. I think what happens, those in this industry, whether you're a college, university, institution, or a faculty member, or a learning company executive, and if you're trying to hold on to everything you got, you're done. So I think there's a place for all of it. I love it. If you're a faculty member and you're a first mover around certain things and you really want to take the time to do all that for your class, we have something called a custom operation, or you can go open source. Our agenda isn't necessarily even content, because more and better content has not changed the world.
Rich, I've got to,
so it's
I'm
something
sorry,
different.
Brian, I got to move on so other folks at least get the first 20 minutes. But did you want to give Rich a hug now or later?
We're gonna have dinner later. Okay. And that'll be much more special.
Great. All right, so content broadly defined, because it's so easy to do stuff in theory, because of digital tools now as opposed to an earlier time, becomes a big issue of quality assurance. How do I know stuff is good? McGraw's got ways of vetting that. We're seeing an emerging infrastructure to allow us to vet that. Saylor is involved in offering creating, supporting free college courses, Amanda, in terms of, as are some others. But if I'm a faculty member, where do I go to understand the quality of this process? If I'm a student who's looking for something, Ken Burns does a video series on PBS that's vetted quality. I can learn a lot from that. Oprah picks a book for the book club. There's a vetting process and materials beyond that. If I'm scouring the internet and looking for an online course because I need to know something about accounting or business or marketing or the MOOCs, beyond the brand name, how do we deal with quality assurance in this new world of ubiquitous tools?
Yeah, so how many people know about Saylor? I think this is probably the fewest hands. Yes, so really quickly, Michael Saylor was the MOOCs before there were MOOCs. He's a trustee of the foundation. In about 2008, he decided that education should be free. So he went and he put 344 courses online in those 5 years. I took over for the foundation about 3 months ago, and virtually, if I asked that question in any audience, about 3 or 4 of you would raise your hands. It was quiet, right? Why was it quiet? Because he was very careful about what was going up. Because you get what you pay for, right? You say something's going to be free, everyone's going to be cautious of it. Is this really going to be any good? And I'm experiencing problems, so I'm kind of the naysayer in this panel, I think, because I think the quality control is not yet there. I was actually the first digital person. I was reminding myself last night of how I got my textbooks. And I'm sure any publisher would appreciate this. You had 10 days when I was in school to return your textbooks. And I would copy the chapters that were on my syllabus, and I would return my textbooks.
Statute of limitations is 7 years, and you've been out of college for?
I've been out of college for 20 years. No. Oh gosh, yes, 20 years. So my quality control was I would take those chapters and I would show them to my father, who would then enhance my learning experience. He would say, here's other things to do. Here's other things to read beyond what your teacher is giving you. The quality control that needs to exist is 2 levels for us. I think one is the quality of the content itself. Is this right? Is this accurate? And I do believe the publishers in OpenStax and our process at Saylor, which nobody knows about, was very thorough. We went out to faculty who were subject matter experts. We asked for peer review. We asked for editors. We came back. We did double-blind review. We are now in the process of getting our stuff accredited by NCCRS. And what happened with some of our courses was it wasn't good enough. So we submitted 7 courses, only 5 got approved, right? So what was the quality breakdown there? So we have to get into the role as these materials get into the hands of any student learner around the world of practicing kind of a DEMA model, which is the development, implement, monitor, and adjust. We kind of throw it up there and we say, sure, now it must be right. And then some author will upgrade it and it'll be 1.2 and then 2.5. So with digital, you have to have that quality control experience that is about the content, but you also have to now have a new set of quality controls of the experience. Right? So my experience was one-on-one with my beloved father, right? Not everybody can do that kind of thing. What we need to also do is enhance that peer-to-peer relationship of what can we be doing with the digital content that enhances the person's ability to learn a mastery of the skill, not just the dissemination of a fact, but how can I get really, really good at something? So I'm a little bit worried about where the quality control is in digital. I think it's great to have a million things out there, but if my kid, who's 9 years old, typed in E = MC squared right now, she'd get 4 or 5 different answers, and I have to teach her which one's right. And she shouldn't have to be in that because there's only one answer, right answer to that. So what we're trying to do at Saylor Foundation is we're taking a new effort this year, and we're migrating those 344 classes to a new platform. We're not going to move all of them because some of them don't deserve to be moved. We have to take a hard look at the courses we developed, and we're going to kind of go on this opening up. Like, let's open the closet and see what needs to get thrown out. And I think all people in digital technology education programs should be doing that. And you should be doing that on a pretty regular basis because there's new ways and new pieces of information and new facts almost every year. So the old stuff you can't change, but the new ways that we can approach quality really needs to be looked at, and it's a very quiet part of the conversation right now.
So Amanda, you should be very careful talking about the old stuff, because the old stuff is some of us with gray and thinning hair.
I don't think of you as old.
And I want to turn to the issue of culture. There's a joke in the software industry that some of you may know that God could create the world in 7 days because there were no legacy systems and no legacy users. I will give you another 2 or 3 seconds to ponder that in the context of today's conversation and what you go back to tomorrow morning. So Mickey, you deal with these legacy systems and legacy users. I sometimes notice teachers in schools and principals and faculty members and other stuff. And I use that very facetiously. Don't stone me on the way out of here. It is the case, it's not the dicta of presidents, it's the willingness of individual faculty members to say, there is compelling value for me as a faculty member, we heard this in the prior session, and for my students to do this, to go digital. But there's also a necessary infrastructure, there's a comfort level. Talk a bit about the experiences you've had with Courseload in terms of helping through that, crossing that chasm a bit.
Yeah, we could spend the whole rest of the day on this issue.
No,
but
we can't.
I'll
We
come
can't.
back to
You get about 30 seconds.
Topically, we could. But so there's a legacy for faculty at institutions that have academic freedom to have virtual carte blanche in the selection of their course materials. But what happens when the world goes to print to digital forms from paper that's bound with cardboard? Is it acceptable a user experience for a student to do their highlighting and annotating with one set of digital tools in some McGraw-Hill content and a different set of digital tools in Pearson content? Who wants to be consigned to the user equivalent experience of using 5 email programs in one day? Is it acceptable to assign a cloud-based digital courseware solution that has lousy uptime? If using the gradebook is important across the campus, is it okay to assign digital courseware that can't talk to the gradebook? If LMS is important to your campus, is it okay to assign digital courseware that doesn't work with a single sign-on through the LMS? Is it okay to assign digital courseware that creates problems for students with disabilities?
Are you going to answer any of these questions, or are you just going to throw them out?
So what
Well, that's the conversation for the rest of the day. Yeah.
There you go. So what happens in this new world? Well, it may be that sometimes courseware will be ruled out of bounds because it doesn't provide access to comprehensive data that institutions want to be able to pull from it. Courseware may be ruled out of bounds because it creates problems for students with disabilities. It may be ruled out of bounds because it doesn't integrate with other kinds of technology that the university prizes. So my projection is, if there's value in a great user experience, a consistent user experience, if there's value in comprehensive data, if there's value in accessible content, these technology considerations will start to limit the traditional freedoms that have existed in the legacy environment. And I think not so much about what content is used, but how it's delivered. So that's...
So I want to come back to delivery of content, and I want to come back to quality for a moment. You use the D word, data.
Yeah.
It seems to me that in the conversation about quality, we heard this in the prior session in terms of the MOOCs, tracking every keystroke, every eyeball movement, that in digital environments, you get all kinds of new data you couldn't have in the past. One of the really interesting issues about my new widget book is that in an old model, the quality assurance process would bring that to market either through an OER or a traditional publishing process, and then there would be reviews, formal and informal. People would stand up and stand with and say, Casey Green has written the best new widget book presenting this material in a new and conceptually fresh way. And then there'll be a bunch of folks either virally or on the street going out to push, to promote that material. The question now under QA is, how do we know that I've written the best book? Because we can get empirical data in terms of the performance of students in a variety of different environments and tracking that. We're going to have a panel about big data later this afternoon. I'll be back for that. But short term, for those of you who are in the sort of the content providing part of this, or supporting that content, how does the conversation about data change the conversation about QA? Let me go straightly through. Rich, we'll start with you and down.
So to me, the thing that's really exciting about digital, as far as quality control, is that we can experiment and explore with many different ways of understanding and controlling quality. Everything from the sort of paper-based system that's been developed all the way to adopting scientific peer review, blind review, to community style, all the way to ultimately what we're interested in is, does this content improve student learning outcomes? And I think that
I may have a great book. The question is, do students learn any more with me? Or do they learn because it's in your class as opposed to Amanda's class or Brian's class, Mickey's class or G's class?
But that's the power of big data, is you're able to aggregate across, basically average out the instructor effect, and then just look at the effect of the material.
How does data change the process? We see this in adaptive learning, don't we, Brian? All of a sudden, we have an immediate feedback to the instructor and the student.
Quality assurance is having a massive impact on our business at McGraw-Hill. Because of our, we like to think that we created the modern adaptive movement in higher education. We've been using adaptive for a long time. So we provide our authors today with what we call a heat map. It's a digital heat map through our adaptive engines, our adaptive technology. Yeah. So if a professor, if an author thought that my coverage of time value of money was genius, I've been doing it for 10 years. They get this heat map.
I read it's wonderful. It's
they
great
get
stuff.
this heat map that says it's awful, actually. And we can't say that to an author, but a heat map can.
Right.
And it's absolutely changing the way that they create their own content. It's unbelievable.
I mean, for the kind of data on video?
Yeah, I mean, just to Brian's point, that's one of the things we wrestle with is giving the tools to the faculty to understand not only how the student is using video, but actually the bigger challenge is to infer how that faculty member is communicating the information. So, you know, it's one thing to see that John Doe didn't watch such and such video and showed up at class unprepared for it, but is there a way to infer to the faculty member, you know, is there another way, if you're going to do a flipped classroom, to present your message that will be more readily received by the
But I think part of the challenge with data is too often we use data as a weapon as opposed to a resource.
Right.
It's used against us. It's against the faculty member as opposed to evaluating the content as opposed to the faculty member who uses the content. Rich?
Well, to me, the thing that's most exciting about digital in this conversation is, speaking as an engineer, the only way you can really improve a process is by closing the feedback loop. And what we're seeing for really the first time with digital textbooks is that author to student back to author feedback loop closed. It just was never, that channel was never there before. So
Author, teacher,
it
student.
taught author, teacher, student. But the fact that an author can really understand what's working and not should lead to a absolutely step change in the rate of improvement of learning materials.
Well, and let me
Amanda and then Mickey.
Let me add to that. I think that the other person I would include there is the peer, right? So I think the other thing that you have is author created, master creates content, must be brilliant, wrote the book. When MIT launched, I think this is actually still a true fact, and I have no disrespect to MIT at all, but when
A true fact as opposed to a truthy fact?
Yes, thank you. When they put up OCW courses, there were something like 120 actually wrong things from the almighty professors on their PDFs. I think to date, most of those are not actually taken down because the cost to upload everything and then go find the mistakes is just too difficult and then bring it back down. So the peers and the people who are catching the mistakes are just the students, right? Saying, oh, no, that's not right. And sometimes it was the professor's own student. So I think you could add, I agree with you. I think data should not be a weapon. I think data should be a tool. And I think you should empower the students. Just in the prior panel, we were talking about how the student is the client. I think what you also have to say is the student is of course, a learner, but they might also know something themselves that can contribute to that part of the process of closing that quality loop of, hey, here's a good way, and the way you can use data is, right, you can look at time-based situations of how long is somebody really in that section for and what's going on there. Maybe we're pushing people to do the 6-minute video because it is better, and we've always known that logically, but now we have the data to support it. So that pushes the faculty member to get the important stuff up forward. The peer person is the other part of that feedback loop that I think is incredibly important to this.
Mickey, you want to get on this before we go to the next?
I think it's been well answered. I'm actually interested in talking about the economics part of your...
All right, we're going to take a quick part of the economics. Sorry, Brian. Sorry, here we go. But, great expectations, digital should be cheap. Of course, we all also believe that technology will reduce, should improve productivity in higher education. None of us want to be involved in the faculty meeting that actually defines productivity among faculty members, right? Please? Okay. So go to the money, go to the economics issue.
So if you take a fresh look at this, and I actually agree with Sean Devine, there's not a whole lot of savings that come out of saving money on print and distribution. If you look at the economics of a supply chain for academic content, there's the creators of the content and the users of the content and the connectors in between. In today's world, you look at the supply chain, there are used textbook companies and there are rental textbooks, there's piracy. These are huge economic leakages that don't return back to the content creators. At the same time, you go to a community college and you ask a faculty member, how many of your students don't have the content for your class? And they'll often tell you it's 50% or more. And one of the biggest contributors to dropout and failure in a community college setting is, I couldn't buy my content or I bought it too late. So you put these things together and then you look at, say, a University of Phoenix, which for years has been working to purchase content for all their students and using that leverage to get lower prices on the content. Kind of a win-win. And if you think about the digital world, Why shouldn't students have all of the content that they need for their courses? Why shouldn't that be baked into the cost of education? And then can providers of that content provide it at a lower cost because they're making up on volume what they're
Mickey,
giving
I'm
away
going
in
to stop
price?
you. I'm going to pull our audience. How many of you are teachers? Actually, higher ed, because K-12 has this latitude. How many of you would be willing to accept somebody else choosing your textbook for you?
We're not talking about choice of content. We're not talking about choice of content.
Yeah.
We're talking about a guarantee by the institution that every student in the class every student in the class will purchase that content,
Right.
or that'll be part of the cost of education.
But
That has nothing to do with choice of what the content is.
if the content's not available digitally, or if our institution doesn't have an agreement with Acme College Publishers that allows me to do a significantly reduction cost, and I want the widget book that's expensive as opposed to the OER or the licensed digital copy that's not, that gets into an issue of faculty choice, according to the audience.
Sure, but that's an edge case. But
I'm sorry, that's a what?
That's an edge case. The model has been proven that even in the print world, where the institutions work to guarantee that every student will pay, the prices come down dramatically across a wide swath of desired content.
Let's go to the audience. How many of your institutions do you think could move to a model where every student is guaranteed, would do the deal, every student gets the stuff if by doing a licensing agreement with a publisher? Still not a lot of hands among those who work in the fields. Brian?
If I may, so I think that the problem in many ways is already solved. I was with a state senator in a place recently. And
place?
this is
Is this the 52nd
I
state?
I was editing the names. But
So some things that happen in
this
Vegas
senator-
stay in, don't
So this senator is a big OER, we gotta make it all free kind of guy. And I'm very much open to anything that will improve the outcomes of the students. And I said, actually, I think what you found is this, Senator. I think what you found is that faculty members, the textbook decision is the least important decision in their life. And what's important is they're trying to, most 70% of faculty members are adjuncts. And then you have researchers, and they're trying to figure out a lot of other things. Then you have the chair people and the deans, and they're saying they've got to figure out their budgets, whereas all those things that we know that they deal with. The affordability issue has already been solved. It's an awareness, like I just said. You can get a $25 or $30 Just the Facts Ma'am ebook if that's what you want. I think the real issue is how do we develop technologies and other things that are also affordable that will help students better understand the way to learn and will improve the results and outcomes. That's the more interesting issue because I think affordability has already been solved.
Rich, I want to give you a quick opportunity on
Yeah,
awareness,
just-
and then I've got to take us to one last
just-
topic before we go to the group.
Super quick. So there's a lot of numbers up here on the screen. I think that one of the things I'm excited about in open education is the number is 0, right? Kids can have a book for $0, and I think what that's going to do is it's going to put pressure on all of these entities to justify and demonstrate, right, that they're adding extra learning outcome value to students, right, for a non-free piece of material. So I think it's going to help drive more transparency in the industry.
Yeah, but the $0 issue in terms of ecosystem becomes a really interesting challenge. Brian needs revenue to do all the QA.
Absolutely.
How do you do all the QA and sustainability?
But if Brian's adding value on top of a free book, students will be willing to pay for that, and if they're getting better learning outcomes, they should pay for that.
But unless Michael Saylor is willing to write the check, as he's currently been doing with the materials from the Saylor Foundation, most faculty members who write books are not about to give that up for their time, and let alone the ecosystem costs of editing, fact-checking, licensing other kinds of supplemental content. Somewhere the system has to be lubricated.
Absolutely. So that's why we've sought venture philanthropy just at the front end, just to back the development of the books, and then use the ecosystem of partners to sustain that long term.
Okay, I want to come back to, as we close before we go to the group, Brian, back to you. We're 16 months in, 18 months in. You said 36 months. Let us stipulate. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I know you did a follow-on piece this past summer about the when. Panel, very quickly, you get 10, 15 words. Are we going to make 36 months? Is it 48 months? Is it in your lifetimes? I mean, at what point does it all go digital in terms of the content, the distribution, and the acceptance by the clients, both faculty and students? And let's just go down the road. G, let me begin with you.
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of video, I think
Video's already digital.
yes, exactly, and I think the students are there today. They're comfortable with it. They want to use it. They want to embrace it. They've got their devices. They want to use it. I think it's the faculty and the faculty creating video content, being comfortable with using video content, and I don't think they're gonna be there in 36 months.
Mickey, in terms of faculty going all digital and accepting?
I love Brian's ambition. I think it's more likely to be 4 or 5 years. And the point is that K through 12 in some ways is moving faster than higher ed when it comes to digital. So you get all those learners who are coming into
K-12 has a kind of command and control that higher ed doesn't have.
It does.
So,
Yeah,
which is one of the culture issues. Amanda?
I would agree with that. I think on the value chain of, it's going to, the K-12 learner is going to force the issue at the higher ed level. I think it's just a no-brainer that's going to have to be digital.
And I think it's earlier than 36 months. We've got 1 year, 6 months, 7 minutes, blah, blah, blah.
You all see the virtual clock?
I think we got the virtual clock.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Rich?
It will happen. It will happen extremely quickly when it does. But a key thing is community college students, the biggest chunk of college students, they need to have digital technologies. They need to have access.
And a supporting infrastructure to make it work at home and others. All right, we have a couple of moments for a few questions. We can turn on the house lights, please.
Casey, we've got a question back here in the
Great.
room.
And if you would please, who you are and where you're from so our inference engines can be active.
Jim Bauer, I'm usually in seat 3A or 3D.
Is that an airline seat or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So so the first thing is the internet is not about content, it's about process. And I've got some bad news I'd like you to react to. The Common Core standards for language just issued require that 4th, 5th, and 6th graders learn how to go on the internet and construct their own textbooks.
Is there a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that
What
bad news?
happens
Is that
to
the-
your textbooks
is that the
when
bad news?
Or
That's
is
the
that
bad.
good
Well, it's the bad
Or
news
is
if
that
you're in the
good news?
textbook production and pushing business, because in fact, children construct their own content, and now they're going to be required to do it as part of the Common Core standards. So what happens when those 8-year-olds get to college and someone hands them a book, whether it's digital or not, and says, "Here's something we made for you"?
Well, my reaction is, I think there's often a view that, especially former textbook executives, that somehow people believe that we're under threat. And my meaning is this: I love that, because I'm not in the textbook business, I'm in the learning business. So if that comes to fruition, I'm in the learning technologies and other kinds of things, but so if students, if that dream is actually realized, that's a wonderful thing. I got 4 kids, 14 and under, so I'm not under threat at all. I think about it differently than that.
Anybody else want to add that before we go on? No. Carrie, who's next?
Okay, we've got one here.
You are, sir.
Michael Hirsch with ProQuest. My question is, in terms of access to Courseware and both ubiquitous access that we've talked about, including Amanda's various copyright piracy activities.
That never happened. That never happened. That never happened.
Why it seems no point in the conversation is the library. Is that an opportunity there, or is that just being missed?
Role of the library, panel? Brian, you guys, Nikki?
Well, I think there's a divergence happening with content, and one pocket you have kind of these wholly contained educational ecosystems, and in another you have kind of interoperable elements of content that people want to weave together in patterns of their own choosing. I think the library is hugely important for the part of the educational ecosystem that's going to go towards mashable, kind of self-curated content for courseware.
Yeah, I think on the libraries, the librarian is the curator of the content. So I think that there's not enough respect for the librarian in any field, especially in education. If you were to take it outside of education and look at a law firm, and do you even see those old legal books anymore? You don't. They have more access to resources than probably any faculty member. So I think that is a really good question, and we should be bringing them into the conversations probably much earlier than we do. So I think you're right.
All right, with that, we have to be conscious of time. I want to thank the panel, Rich, Brian, Amanda, Nikki, G. I want to thank all of you for staying with us this far along. More to come. Thank you, folks. Thank you.